Breaking tonight, a man charged with murder and moments ago facing a judge accused of dismembering a body and then carrying some of the body parts back to his home.
Hey, what is up, you guys? It's Dustin and I'm back with another video. I was scrolling TikTok last night and of course I fell down a rabbit hole, and this one is about Joe Rogan and a guest that he had on his podcast. Now, I'm not really a watcher of the Joe Rogan podcast, not because I dislike him or anything, I just forget that it exists. But I see a lot of his podcasts reposted over on TikTok and I see a lot of people talking about it, and a TikTok came across my feed yesterday about Joe Rogan and a guest that he had on his podcast just recently, and now he has ended up being arrested. So I wanted to come on here and talk about that. But before we get into that, I would like to thank all of you guys. I have a lot of new subscribers here. I was not anticipating any of the videos that I've posted to do so well lately, so I really just wanted to thank all of you guys that have been watching my content. It's been a lot of fun stepping outside of the box and talking about other things than Jeffree Star, Manny MUA, and Laura Lee. But if you guys want to hear what happened with Joe Rogan and this person that he had on his podcast, stay tuned to this video. So if you're like me, you were probably introduced to Joe Rogan when Fear Factor was a thing back in the early 2000s. It was one of those shows that you kind of watch with like both hands over your eyes with your fingers like this, so you could see what was really going on when they were eating cow tongues and worms and all that stuff. Well, since that show ended, Joe Rogan started a podcast and it's quickly become one of the biggest podcasts. He gets millions of listeners every single month.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Well, on this podcast, he talks about all kinds of things like UFOs, extraterrestrials, genetically modified food, vaccines, anything and everything is talked about on this podcast. And I like that Joe Rogan really listens to the people that he has on there. And he always has the best stories to go along with what he's talking about. Well, he recently had someone named Sheldon Johnson on his podcast, and they were talking about how people can be rehabilitated after they've been through the prison system.
And I left the gangs alone.
And shortly after he was on the podcast, he ended up being arrested for murder. So what I want to do, since I don't know all the details, is I want to react to this USA Today article that I found. The headline reads, Sheldon Johnson, Joe Rogan podcast guest, arrested after body parts found in freezer. What in the Jeffrey Dahmer is going on here? A man who became a public advocate for criminal justice reform after being released from prison last year was arrested on a murder charge Thursday after police said they found a person's body parts inside a New York City home.
Surveillance video tells the story.
The tenant of the apartment, he came in, he never came out. So I called police because it's suspicious.
The super providing me with these surveillance pictures inside the building that allegedly show Johnson carrying bags in and out of the apartment building the day of the murder and changing his clothes several times, as well as wearing disguises.
And first, before we get into this, really get into it, how do you think that it's possible that you would be able to murder someone, put them in your freezer, and nobody would find out? It's 2024. It's not 1945. Sheldon Johnson, 48, was jailed without bond on Friday morning on charges including second-degree murder, New York City Department of Corrections online records show. The victim's relationship with Johnson was not immediately known, but the New York Police Department identified the victim as 44-year-old Colin Small. Johnson also faces charges of manslaughter and criminal possession of a weapon, the NYPD told USA Today. So I'm just going to go ahead and assume that this guy was a felon, so he shouldn't have really had a firearm to begin with. The article goes on to say, body parts found in freezer during welfare check. Police said officers responded to Small's Bronx home to conduct a welfare check on Tuesday night and found a headless torso in the apartment. Can you imagine being a police officer going out to do a welfare check on someone that you think may need mental help or something, only to find a torn apart torso? What? Responding paramedics pronounced the victim dead at the scene, and officials later identified him as Small. The Office of Chief Medical Examiner will determine Small's cause of death, police said. According to CBS New York, police said Johnson shot Small and dismembered his body. A search of Johnson's Harlem apartment revealed the remainder of the body, the arms and the head inside of a freezer, the outlet reported. I'm not innocent, Johnson shouted as he was led out of the police station after his arrest, the New York Daily News reported. Well, no shit. If it wasn't already alarming enough that they found a torso in this man's apartment, here's where it gets even more crazy and a little bit more sinister, if you ask me, because this person was working with the youth of his community. Why is it that the people that work with our youth and the future generations are always found out to be criminals? I'm not saying that's always the case, but it happens a lot, especially in churches.
One thing I learned really
Johnson works with at-risk youth at the Queens Defenders in New York. Appeared on an episode of The Joe Rogan Experience in February alongside Josh Dubbin, a civil rights attorney, and the executive director of Perlmutter Center for Legal Justice. In the episode, Johnson said he grew up in Harlem and lived in a completely deaf household. At the time of the podcast, Johnson told Rogan he'd been out of prison for 9 months. Just 9 months? And you go out here and you murder somebody and you stuff their torso into your apartment, and then you want to go on and talk about how people can be rehabilitated? This doesn't really support what you're claiming, Mr. Johnson. And he spoke about his advocacy work. He said he entered prison as a high-ranking member of the Bloods after selling drugs and being arrested in an assault case, but later separated his ties from the gang around 2005. I really said, I have to change my life. I have to change my life. I just can't do this, Johnson said on the podcast. I had a wife, I had kids, I had family still. My son was growing up. He was hearing stories of my so-called notoriety. I just didn't want to be that dad. Well, that kind of aged like hot milk set out in the summer sun, didn't it? Didn't it? Sheldon Johnson previously served time for attempted murder and robbery. New York Department of Correction records show Johnson was convicted of charges including attempted murder and robbery in 1999, so he's been at this for a while. After spending 25 years in prison, he was released from an upstate prison on May 4th, records show. So this guy literally sat in prison for years, 2.5 decades, to think about the things that he did that got him there, only for him to get out and be out for 9 months, go on the Joe Rogan podcast and murder someone. That is crazy. It was not immediately known if Johnson had obtained an attorney on the new charges. Johnson is slated to appear in court Monday on the charges, records show. And that's the end of the article. I'm going to continue to follow this to see what comes of it. I just cannot believe that this person went on Joe Rogan's podcast and talked about advocacy and helping younger youth people while trying to use his story as a symbol of transformation. And honestly, I just hate how this turned out because nobody should have had to die. But if you guys made it this far in this video, like the video if you enjoyed it, and leave me the judge emoji in the comment section down below. I am currently working on a host of videos. I want to talk about Delilah Renee. There's some other things that I would like to talk about with the victory over Japan kiss photo. There's a lot of people upset and now I understand why, so that content is coming this week. Again, thank you all for helping me try to get to my goal of 200,000 subscribers. It finally feels like I may actually get there and I really appreciate you guys so much. But with all that said, I hope you guys all have an amazing Sunday and I will see you all in my next video. Bye guys.